In multinational corporate environments, technical qualifications are frequently rendered useless by a single, stringent filter: English language proficiency. A candidate's engineering or business expertise is strictly bottlenecked by their ability to articulate it. When an otherwise highly qualified applicant stumbles over basic vocabulary or freezes under the pressure of spontaneous conversation, employers rarely perceive it as a simple translation delay. They perceive it as a lack of preparation. The qualitative consensus from labor market research confirms that linguistic deficits exact a severe professional cost. Graduates consistently fail to secure employment not because they misunderstand their field, but because they cannot navigate the communication nodes required to practice it. The first failure point occurs during job interviews. Candidates with limited spoken fluency resort to brief, vague responses. Interviewers actively interpret this lack of detail as a signal of incompetence. The second failure point is the resume. Poor vocabulary selection and awkward grammatical structures lead to immediate rejection before a candidate even reaches the interview stage. This matrix maps the 3 critical areas identified by employability studies. Even if a candidate secures the job, the third failure point, workplace integration, stalls their career. A lack of linguistic precision limits their ability to write reports, lead projects, or engage directly with clients. The employability bottleneck is entirely distinct from a lack of general intelligence. It is a specific, isolated deficit in spontaneous spoken fluency and the ability to apply incidental vocabulary under pressure. To understand why this deficit exists, we have to look at the higher education classrooms responsible for training these candidates, where traditional, textbook-based instruction remains the standard. Textbook methods rely heavily on controlled grammar drills and sterile scripted speaking tasks. They teach students how to construct perfect sentences in a vacuum, failing to replicate the unpredictable, dynamic nature of actual professional dialogue. Educational researchers propose a technological intervention to fix this, integrating authentic, on-demand Web 2.0 audio, specifically podcasts, directly into the curriculum. To test this, researchers Ehsan Namaziandost and Fidel Chakmak designed a quasi-experiment involving 139 intermediate EFL learners across 3 language institutes in Iran. Their thesis argues that podcast integration operates as a statistically robust mechanism for bridging the fluency gap, forcing learners to process real-world, unscripted language. By tracking these 139 students, the study provides the data needed to quantify exactly how much this digital audio intervention outperforms traditional teaching methods in generating professional-grade fluency. This diagram outlines the 13-week experiment. 139 participants were divided into 4 pathways. The control group received standard textbook instruction. The remaining students formed 3 experimental groups, each assigned a different podcast series: All Ears English, Splendid English, and Coffee Break English. The experimental groups followed a strict 3-phase pedagogical model. It began with a pre-listening phase to activate background knowledge and predict target vocabulary. The second phase focused on guided listening. Students listened to each episode twice, first for general comprehension and then targeting contextual vocabulary. The final phase demanded output. Students recorded weekly vlog reflections, speaking directly to camera to summarize the lesson by actively deploying the new expressions. This methodology is anchored in Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, which dictates that language development is inherently social and requires interaction with external tools to construct knowledge. Within this framework, the podcast acts as a mechanism of mediation. It delivers the raw, authentic linguistic input that textbook dialogue simply cannot provide. The vlog reflections then provide the scaffolding. By forcing students to structure their thoughts and speak aloud, the active task converts passive audio input into permanent language acquisition. The researchers designed the experiment to strictly isolate this active, technology-mediated pedagogical loop and test it against the passive learning environment of the traditional control group. Before tracking the results of the intervention, the researchers had to verify the baseline abilities of every participant. This data table consolidates the ANOVA pretest scores for both speaking and vocabulary. The critical columns to note here are the F values and the significance, or P values, which measure the probability that differences occurred by chance. In statistical analysis, a p-value must drop below 0.05 to be mathematically significant. Here, the pretest p-values registered at 0.502 and 0.065, both clearing the threshold with room to spare. This mathematically confirms that the minor variations in initial test scores were entirely random fluctuations. The groups possessed no inherent differences in ability. All 139 participants entered the trial on equal footing, ensuring any final divergence would be the direct result of the teaching methods. At the conclusion of the 13-week trial, the post-test results revealed exactly what the intervention achieved. This table illustrates the post-test data, showing a clear statistical rupture between the cohorts. The significance column for both speaking and vocabulary has flatlined at 0.000. A p-value of 0.000 definitively proves that the variance in student performance was caused by the instructional intervention. To measure the exact magnitude of that difference, statisticians use a metric called partial eta squared. For vocabulary acquisition, the partial eta squared effect size registered at 0.538, meaning over 50% of the total variance is directly attributable to the podcast method. The speaking metric showed a similar impact at 0.484, proving a substantial, isolated improvement in oral proficiency. This bar chart translates those effect sizes into mean scores. The experimental groups hovered around 22, while the traditional control group stalled at 15.97. The standard deviation brackets reveal the experimental groups achieved consistent progress, while the control group suffered highly dispersed scores. On a 25-point speaking rubric, the podcast groups consistently outperformed their textbook-trained peers by over 6 full points. The experimental data proves that podcast integration provides a statistically verifiable advantage over traditional instruction. One final empirical question remains. Did these students succeed because they listened to a specific brand of podcast, or did they succeed because of the pedagogical format itself? To answer this, researchers ran a Bonferroni multiple comparisons post hoc test. This matrix isolates the variance strictly between the 3 experimental groups, completely excluding the textbook control group. Notice the p-values here. They register at exactly 1.00 across the pair-wide comparisons. A p-value of 1.00 indicates exactly 0 statistically significant difference in outcomes. Students using All Ears English performed identically to those using Splendid English or Coffee Break English. The acquisition mechanism is entirely content agnostic. The specific audio brand is irrelevant. It is the format of authentic linguistic exposure paired with an active pedagogical loop that builds fluency. That 6-point jump on the speaking rubric directly addresses the job interview bottleneck introduced at the start of this study. A 6-point statistical difference represents the real-world gap between a candidate who freezes while searching for words and an articulate professional who can easily explain their technical achievements. Likewise, the observed variance in incidental vocabulary acquisition translates directly into a graduate's ability to utilize precise industry terminology, whether they are drafting a structured resume or engaging corporate clients. The data demands a shift in methodology. Universities must move away from sterile, controlled drills and place students in environments of authentic, unscripted language exposure. For educational institutions looking to solve the graduate employability crisis, the pedagogical integration of Web 2.0 audio provides a statistically proven framework for engineering true, spontaneous workplace fluency.